Hi, everybody. I am Thomas Howard. I'm one of the ICE technical marketing engineers here at Cisco, and I am joined today with another ICE technical marketing engineer, Charlie Moreton. Hey, Charlie.
Hey, Thomas, thanks for having me here today.
I'm glad to have you. What we're going to be doing today is something a little bit different than maybe you've seen before. I brought Charlie in on this one because, first of all, he's done some amazing webinars on automation with ICE, and I thought it would be fun to try something different, kind of get his perspective on some of these things that we're going to be doing today, and hopefully that'll make it a little bit more interesting for all of you out there as well, instead of just hearing one of us talk about what we're doing. So we're going to cover all these topics. There's a lot of great things we're going to do today. So basically everything in terms of really lifecycle management of an ICE node, but with automation and doing it for your lab. So with that, I want to go ahead and get started. Uh, why the lab? Because everybody needs an ICE lab. Uh, we want you to have an ICE lab because this allows you to, first of all, play with the product, get to know it, mock up your scenarios. And for sellers, this means that you can do your proof of concepts, get to know the product, practice before you go to a customer site and help them. And then, of course, we also have a lot of students watching our webinars, as we know from the surveys and things that we get back from all of you. And so we got students, trying to get those certifications, and we want to make sure that they have a nice, free, easy way of working with ICE to get certified. So, I think everybody should have an ICE lab, and we try to make it easy, regardless of what your choice of platform is, because we have all kinds of platforms for ICE. We have the appliances, the virtual machines, the cloud instances, and honestly, that's one of the reasons also why I brought Charlie in, is because he did a webinar on deploying ICE in all of these platforms all at the same time. It was great. So Charlie, is there anything else you'd like to mention about all the different ICE platforms?
No, it's funny because there are certain oddities with the different platforms based upon how you deploy them. Right now we're dealing with one with 3.2 and 3.3 on Hyper-V, which also extends to Azure Cloud that we can talk to later. It just you need an additional hot patch to get that working correctly, but that's freely available on our download site. And then with the other virtual machine hypervisors, we got some other configurations that you have to take care of before actually launching ICE. Other than that, it's all pretty much the same. Just remember
Yeah.
that the cloud instances is just somebody else's data center.
Exactly. So, um, these are all pretty much the same with ICE. Once you get ICE installed on, it all works the same. We don't care how you deploy it. So whichever one works best for you, that's the one we encourage you to use. And then for our sellers out there that do want to do this, we're going to be talking about licensing obviously today, but I want to remind them that you do have an option to get a 1 year set of licenses. So if you go to the links here, I'll have them at the end as well. You can go and get a set of ICE licenses for a year for up to 500 Premier endpoints and multiple ICE VMs. So you can build a small deployment and do a POV. So that option is available to you. But for everybody else, we really try to promote this idea of ICE licensing and making sure that you have or take advantage of that free 90-day download to try and evaluate it, play with it, especially in your lab, like I said. And if you look at the ICE licensing guide, it says very clearly, upon installation, and again, no matter what platform you install it on, you will get 90-day evaluation license for 100 endpoints at the Premier level, which includes all ICE features. And that allows you to do a limited deployment, which really means a standalone ICE node, right? A single ICE node. That's kind of what that means. And so if you go ahead and install that and you run ICE on one of those supported platforms, you can actually see that right at the top there, it says immediately, you have 89 days left of your evaluation license. And we even have a little banner up there at the top as well that tells you, so even if you dismiss the banner, there's a little uh, a notification that pops up up there letting you know you're in evaluation mode. So that's there. And then again, if you go to the licensing page, it shows you details there as well. So Charlie, I know you were like our licensing ambassador there for a while. You did a lot of good stuff with ICE licensing. Is there anything else you'd like to mention about this?
No, I just like the fact that our evaluation licenses are full feature evaluation licenses. You can pretty much test out every single feature within ICE just by using that license. And I think that's one of the best things about them.
Yeah. Yeah. That's why we're here, because we just want to make sure you guys know it's available and you can use it, and we encourage you to try it out. So just to be clear on how this works, if you deploy ICE by default and it's a single standalone node, you can do all the different services and things like that. And then if you wanted to go, you could try to change it under deployment nodes. If you were to try and register it, that's how you would basically build out your ICE deployment with multiple nodes. But you can't do it with a standalone. You actually need to go in and you need to make it a primary. Once you make it a primary, then you're allowed to join other nodes to it. But because we know people are they're gonna push the limits on this, so I see what's gonna happen already. So someone's gonna well, I'm just gonna have two nodes, and those two standalone nodes. So yeah, you can fire up as many ICE instances as you want, and those are all individual evaluation standalone nodes. But then as soon as you try and go and do a deployment, right, that's your license violation. That becomes a small deployment, and that's not really what we're trying to encourage. So I won't be surprised if somebody tries it. But that's kind of not the spirit of what we're promoting here. So with that, I wanted to kind of get the licensing part out of the way, because I really wanted to focus on the technology, which I think everybody's going to really like, which is this lifecycle orchestration that we've really been building into ISE 3.x for the past several releases. So all this capability, this what we call lifecycle management of ICE, from provisioning to installation, licensing, certificates, everything. We all have APIs for all these different things. In fact, Charllie did a webinar on zero touch deployment with some of those platforms. So Charllie, anything you want to mention on zero touch ZTP?
I just think, especially if you're doing this for an on-prem installation, whether it's Hyper-V or VMware or any of them, do go ahead and get your zero touch configuration set up, because then once you have that one done, you're going to use that for every time that you extend your evaluation, so that it makes it a lot easier and a lot faster to deploy as well.
Yeah. And you might want to, maybe if you have time, you can pop the link to your guide on ICE zero touch provisioning into the chat or something, so everybody has that as well.
Doing it now.
All right, perfect. So speaking of APIs, we have quite a few of them. So in addition to the lifecycle stuff, we have APIs for managing pretty much all the configuration within ICE. And one thing that I want everybody to know is we have a versioning page, because I get asked this. Just this morning, I got asked, how do I know what's in ICE 2.x for APIs versus ICE 3.x? And so if you go to the versioning page, it tells you very clearly when we added a specific API. So I encourage you to go there and check that out, in case you're wondering what cool things you can do with your version of ICE. Like I said, a lot of the cool stuff you're seeing today was all done in ICE 3.1, patch 1, and later. So here's some of the cool webinars that Charllie and I have done in the past, including his on-premises installation with that ZTP we were just talking about. We've covered REST, we've covered automated provisioning. Charllie always likes to one-up me, and he goes and I could do these small one node things, and he goes and does hybrid multi-cloud deployments and load balancers and all kinds of crazy stuff. In fact, Charlie's going to one-up me after this webinar as well. I'm doing like a little single node lab eval. Charllie, why don't you tell him about what you're working on right now?
Well, I only one up because I got to keep up with the craziness that our partners and customers come up with, and the questions that they ask. We're working on an 8-node automated upgrade to hopefully be able to get it upgraded within like 4 to 5 hours for all 8 nodes, including 3 cloud providers and VMware on-prem.
Of course you are. All right. So yeah, Charlie's always the overachiever, trying to do all these crazy deployments. So I'm your easy intro in your lab today, and then Charlie's going to show you how to do the big stuff a little bit later in another webinar. So what we're working with today is a lot of the automations we work on utilize Ansible for configuration management, and Ansible relies on Python. And then in order to do all the configuration and coding, we use VS Code. And this is all free software, so no excuses for not getting started and playing with it. It's a great way to get introduced to programmability, automation, all that kind of stuff for your network. This is pretty much the industry standard, as far as I know. All these major tools. So this is what you're going to be seeing today in our demo. And what we're going to be seeing is actually going through and provisioning stuff. This is kind of the life cycle we've talked about in the past on some of our other webinars, where you provision ISE, you kind of deploy it, where you kind of put all the nodes together into a single cohesive cluster. And then you maybe want to do some configuration so that you can actually, do some authentication of endpoints on the network. And then you got to do the operations where you're patching it, maintaining it, and doing some queries and other things, backups or stores, all that good stuff. And then at some point, when you're all done, you can just destroy it and start over with a new deployment and upgrade and go from there. That's sort of the modern cloud-based way of doing things, right? What we're going to try and do today is something very similar to that. Only we're going to, again, keep it small, keep it easy in your lab. No production outages to worry about. We're just gonna practice and play in our lab today. And instead of destroying it at the end, the idea here with this eternal evaluation is that we can just take that node and we can generate a new one, right, on a VM, or reinstall software and get another 90 days on our single standalone node. So we want to be able to extend that basically that evaluation period for that one node in our lab, and just keep playing with it to test out things for our production network. So that's the idea. Then to do this, whenever we talk about programmability, you can obviously configure ISE in the GUI. A lot of all the REST APIs, most of them, I guess some of them still do XML, but mostly they use JSON. As we move into things like YAML and a lot of cloud computing with containers and things like that, YAML is really the language of choice. And so you're going to be seeing some YAML code today when we get into our Ansible playbooks. And so to talk about how that works, this is how Ansible works if you aren't familiar with it. So you install Python and Ansible on your computer, kind of like I said, and I use VS Code to help work with that. Ansible has this concept of these modules, or called collections, and we have that for ISE and other Cisco products, and Ansible has a huge number of collections out there. But basically, the idea is you write these things called playbooks, which contain plays, which perform tasks in a very serialized, straightforward, step-by-step manner. And you perform those playbooks against an inventory, and the inventory of these different, either it could be network devices, it could be web servers, it could be ISE nodes, whatever you happen to be running these plays against, to configure them. And so Ansible is made by Red Hat, and so obviously configuring Linux servers is kind of what it's meant for originally. But you can do it for Windows servers, you can do it for ISE, you can do it for other Cisco network devices or other vendors' network devices, and you can even do for cloud infrastructure. And so when you put all these together, this really gives you the ability to start provisioning all this great stuff in your lab and kind of building these things out and playing with it. And that's exactly what we're planning on doing. So Charlie, I know that you're not a software engineer by training. You've kind of learned this the hard way over the past couple of years. So what is your take on Ansible, or just learning YAML and all this stuff, man? How hard was it for you?
Well, first thing, get yourself a Thomas, because if you have a Thomas, you can learn. I got real lucky with that one. But honestly, no, I hate coding, but YAML is so easy. It's almost, I like to compare it to Markdown, but I know YAML ain't Markdown. But it's that simple. It's super easy. The thing I found that I've had the most troubles with was the proper indentation, because if you're just a space off, you can get errors. But other than that, you don't have to worry about the weird squigglies or anything else like you do with the JSON and stuff like that I just hate.
Cool. All right. Thank you for that practical understanding of how it works for somebody who may not have a programming background. Thank you for that. Um, so what we're going to be doing is we're going to be diving deep into code here real soon on how this all works, and of course doing the demo showing you guys how this works. So the basics of this is we're going to be running Ansible against a playbook that we call ISE, the ISE Eternal Evaluation, and it is going to reference a bunch of other playbooks. And basically we can import and include and use these different playbooks when we run other playbooks. So you have this nice modularity, this flexibility in terms of using all these things. But if you look at all those IC playbooks on the right hand side, we're going to be doing a lot of different things in terms of that operational lifecycle that we just talked about. And these are probably some of the things that you do on maybe a daily or weekly basis as well. And so we're going to go through pretty much all these today. You're going to see how these work with automations. And for anybody that wants to try this, yes, all the code is available online in my GitHub account. And so I think I might have another push to do to get the last little changes and nuances I've put on my code, but it's out there for you otherwise. So keep looking for some refreshes in the coming days. And I'll mention Charllie has a repo out there as well. He'll probably put the URL to it in the chat for you. We both tried a folder
named Toys, so I'm excited about checking that out.
Thank you. Yeah. So the idea, the whole idea of play, right? I keep mentioning this idea of playing in your lab, and toys goes right along with it. Just try to make this approachable. Don't be afraid. Try stuff out. Kids learn the way the world works through toys. They play with toys to learn, how physics and creativity and all these other things work. So I encourage you to, put your own scripts in a toys directory and play with things and see how they work. So yeah, I've got a few in there. That's how I try things out and play with them. So I thought I'd share those with you too. So with that, I want to get started. So if you look at that directory, not that one, this one. So this is my GitHub repo. If you scroll down past all those files, you'll see this intro, and it goes through how to get started with all this stuff. And we're not going to go through all this in gory detail, but this is all the things you just heard me talk about, right? With running the ISE playbook and things like that. But basically, typically what you do is you copy that, and then you can clone it into your local computer, and you can install Python and all this good stuff, which we're about to go through. So that's what I'm going to do. It's there for you if you need it. So here's what it looks like. You go on your computer, and I like to put everything in a projects folder, and because I always have lots of projects going on. And so once I do that, I can cd into that directory, and that's where you'll see all the files. Now, what we want to be able to do is take a look at my Python installation right now. So I don't have a lot of stuff in my native computer, my work computer, but this is all the stuff we need to install in order to get this sandbox working with Python and Ansible. So what we do is we're going to install all this, but first we got to get our Python environment working. So I wrote a little script that will go through and install all the requirements. So it's going to install Python into a virtual environment, or a venv it's called sometimes. We're going to install all the Python version. We're going to install the packages required for Ansible. Everything's going to be there for you. And so now if you take a look and you take a look at that pip list again, that's a list of all the packages. We're still on my local computer, but now if we go into the pipenv shell, the virtual environment shell, you can see my prompts changed a little bit. And now if I list, there's all that software that we just installed. So you can see we've got Ansible, Boto is stuff for AWS, Cisco ISE SDK is the Python library, James Path is JSON querying, Paramiko is how we do SSH CLI connectivity to ISE, and PyYAML, of course, because YAML is how we do everything. So that's basically how we get started. And the other thing I want to share is credential management. So I don't want to share my usernames and passwords with you guys. So I put everything into these shell files, and I export my credentials into my environment so that you can't see them, and it's much more secure that way. It's best practice, really. So once you've done that, we can launch VS Code, or VS Codium that I have. And the idea here is all that stuff that I just downloaded, I'm able to view here in VS Code. I have a beautiful editor. And for those of you that are trying to learn coding, VS Code is really the way to go. And I know dark mode is a really big deal for a lot of you out there, Charlie, right? So I'm using the Dracula. I think maybe Sweet Dracula might be my theme I'm using here if anybody cares for that kind of stuff. So um, how's VS Code working out for you, Charlie?
When I first saw it, it confused the heck out of me because up in your top right, you've got that little thumbnail of your file. And as your file gets longer, it actually goes down all the way down the side.
Yeah,
So that actually, I use that a lot now to see where I am in the file. So that helps out. But at first, it just threw me off and I just couldn't get used to it. But the fact that it's so configurable with all the add-ins and the plugins, depending on what languages you're using and all of that, it's actually made it a lot easier for me to compose any of my, whether it's YAML, JSON, or anything like that.
cool. Yeah, so hopefully we're going to go through. You guys will see how this works today if you're not familiar with it. So the idea here is we're going to flip back, and now what we want to do is we want to not do that. We actually want to move ahead. And now that we've launched VS Codium, what we want to do is we want to go ahead and provision this thing. Um, and so to do that, we want to actually, I think that I think I skipped ahead. Okay, we're just going to go provision right now. So
But you're provisioning, but I see that you're patching too. Wait, can you tell me about that?
yeah, so what we're doing, so first of all, I had to enter my SSH password because we're provisioning an SSH key because we're deploying ICE right now in AWS. Um, and I'll go through and I can show you what that looks like. But we're going to go through and do this deploying it in AWS. We can see we now have ICE in our VPC. I'll go show you all the code after this is done launching. We have our instances. You can see it's not there yet. We're about to create our ICE instance. So this automation is going in for AWS is what I coded it in. We're launching our ICE instance in AWS right now. And so if we go back in to AWS, we should see, if we refresh our screen, there it is. So our IC node, you can see it initializing inside of AWS. Okay. And what we're going to do is once that's done, we've allocated this node with a public IP address just because it's easier. I don't want to build a VPN. I'm really just focusing on showing you ICE and automation. I really don't care that it's publicly addressable right now, even though it's a security problem for a real deployment. But for right now, we just want to be able to launch this thing and play with it. So you can see ICE typically takes about 25 minutes, but through the magic of time travel and video editing, we've actually gone and made it really fast so that we can take what's normally a 40-minute installation and do it very quickly. We're going ahead and doing an SSH login right now using our SSH keys. And many of you have probably done the show application status a few times, right, Charlie?
A few thousand.
And it's normally a pretty slow command, but I just want to show you as this thing is launching, if you do want to SSH in, you don't have web access yet because the application server is not running. But if you run that show application status ICE a few times, like we're going to do, you can start to see everything come alive.
For me, once I see that processes for the database server start to increment, I know that something's actually happening, and then you can start seeing some of your not running services into initializing or running or something like that. But yeah, once those database services start to increment and then you start seeing your process IDs, you're golden.
Yep, there it is, just like you said. So we start to see those process IDs, and then ICE is initializing. And if we go back, you can see that the ports come up but now we're waiting on that login screen. So we're actually testing to see the login page, if it's up and responding. And once that happens, we know that ISE is up, so we can go in. I can actually do a CLI-based configuration. So I did that. I'm enabling. I love it. I can use APIs to turn on the APIs so that I can go configure all this other stuff. I added a repository. You can see ISE is now provisioned, and I'm going to do something called an ISE fax check real quick. And it's not enough to go ahead and just provision ISE, but we also want to patch it because we installed ISE 3.2. We want to put on patch 2 as well, since that's the recommended release right now. So normally, if you just install it, no patches, right? Even from the cloud. So you've got to be able to provision it. So we did that. You can see that it's running the patch install task for us automatically. It gave us a task ID if we want to do queries to see what the status is. That's what that's doing down there. And you can see once it's installed the patch again, application server is going to shut down. Then it's going to come back up, wait for the GUI so we can log in again, right? You've probably done this a lot of different times if you've installed patches in ISE as well. After a period of time, boom, it comes up. And let's go back and see what we got. So you can see provisioning and patching all automated. Took us just over an hour with this small evaluation image in AWS. And you can see the bulk, the vast majority of the time was just spent waiting for ISE to boot. So otherwise, Ansible, what we just did here, it ran through all these things. You can see, and even for the patch, waiting for the patch to come. That's what took all the time. Ansible executed this huge list of tasks for us, right? And it summarized all of them, how long they took, and you can see we were completely hands off with this automation. So what I want to do now is kind of go back and show you how we made this thing happen. So I want to bring up my VS Code, and if we go look at our ISE, so here is that ISE YAML file. This one basically calls all of these other playbooks. And what's interesting about this one is basically if we just ran it with just Ansible Playbook ISE.YAML, it would launch against my local host. It pulls in some global variables that we're using for how to, what ISE image, what patch, some of my passwords, all that kind of stuff. That's all put together in this vars file or variables file. I keep it all in one place so I can reuse it in multiple other playbooks like we have down here. It would just run through these serially and perform everything in all these playbooks if I just let it go. But what you saw is when in my command line, I used the -- tags command line option. And what that did is that basically ran whatever matched. And so you saw the provision and you saw the patch. Where's my patch? Am I blind? There it is. Oh my God, right there. I've got patch and hot patch right there. So both of those are taken care of with the patch file. But these are all the different things we can run. So we can mix and match the use of these tags to run these things. And if I go look at that ISE YAML file, here's what it looks like. I actually modified this thing to have my name here in the repository. You got to fill in your own name, and you need to uncomment the domain name if you have one. You don't have to use it, but if you do, it's there. And mine's all built into AWS, so I can provision it out that way. This is where I'm pulling in my ISE username and password for use in the playbooks. I pull it from my environment for my username and password. This is where I can tell it where to go find my SSH keys because we're provisioning ISE into the cloud. You always use SSH keys for connecting to resources in the cloud. So this is where it goes and finds the keys. I'm also going to be doing some configuration a little bit later. So we got our radius and TACACS secrets. This is where I can specify my patch files, any kind of backups and restores I want to do, what AWS AMI I'm going to be using, what instance size, and I can now use that in my ISE node definition down here. If I want to have just one, I can even, if I'm going to build out a big automation like Charllie does, I can just use these variables and use it for all of my instances. I don't have to duplicate the same thing and maintain each one individually. I can reuse those things as variables in my YAML file here. So Charlie, I just covered a bunch of stuff. What do you think people need to know when they do this for the first time, or from what you've seen here?
Well, I tell you what, the variables is a big deal. Basically, you can take that ICE node, anything under ICE nodes, and the name all the way down to node group. You copy that, you paste it, you change your private IP, and then you're done. Of course, you want to change your roles and your services depending on what you're building out, but yeah, that's as simple as it is. You don't have to type in your AMI every time, your instance type every time, or anything like that. You just copy paste, and you got a new node, and you just tell it you want to deploy these different nodes, and it's done. I love it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I specify the private IP, but you don't have to. That's totally optional as well. It would just allocate one in your network CIDR as well for you if you wanted. And then to that end, uh, one of the things we do, part of the automation is being able to specify the roles and services and tags. And then based on those tags, we can actually deploy ICE. I have a playbook for that. I'm not going to get too deep into it, but I just want to let you know this is kind of where we're going with all this, being able to deploy a large deployment like what Charlie's doing. So we've deployed ICE now. And so what we want to do is we want to go ahead and uh, check out those licenses since we're talking about evaluation stuff, right? So we're going to run the licensing playbook just to see that we got our evaluation licenses. It's basically going to tell us what we have. And it just runs this little playbook, which queries the licensing API inside of ICE. And I made this nice little banner that tells you, you've got 89 days left. You can see the nice the bar there that tells you how many days are remaining. And then you can actually see what it says for your individual licenses that you're using down below as well. So I thought that was a little fun one if you ever want to see how many days are left without actually having to log into ICE. The other thing is we should probably log into ICE. So here it is. We got to log in with ICE admin because it's one of our cloud nodes after ICE 3.2. You got to log in with ICE admin. And what happens is it's going to prompt you to change your password because we provision this in the cloud. And usually when you have DevOps people provisioning things in the cloud, that's one person, but then the person that operates it may be NetOps or SecOps or something like that. So they're actually going to go do all this stuff. So once we reset our password, now we get to go log in again with this new password. And what that means is that if we've been using APIs in our environment, or APIs, username and password in our environment, we got to reset those. And that's what this warning is about. Is it basically like, hey, you change your passwords, all your API stuff is probably not going to work anymore. But we have a fix for that. I wanted to point out to you that if you get this prompt in ISE 3.2 patch 2 or later, there's a little hidden checkbox down here where you can go say, don't show me this, please. And it'll be dismissed. You won't be bothered with it again. So if you keep hitting that, accept and close, that's where you can do it. So there's the evaluation banner I was telling you about. And just so you can check and see, yes, we just deployed ISE 3.2 patch 2. So it's all out there, ready to go. The other thing is here's that banner here as well. We can go ahead and dismiss that. And let's go take a look at the licensing page that we've been talking about. So one thing is the serial number. I wanted to show you that just because we want to compare it to the version we're going to bring up a little bit, or the one bring up a little bit later to see that it's different. Otherwise, there's our evaluations. We're not doing anything with it, so therefore no consumption, no licenses have been consumed. But that's just there for your reference. Since we're here, the other thing I want to tell you is this is something that really annoys a lot of people. When you go into ICE for the first time, after 45 days, it's basically going to lock you out if you haven't changed the password. It's really annoying. So I'm going to go in, I'm just going to disable this. Because again, this is my lab, this is evaluation, this isn't production. I'm going to change all this so I can reuse the same password. I don't want to get locked out after 45 days. And I'm going to save all these settings so I don't get annoyed with that. Does that ever happen to you, Charlie, where you get locked out after 45 days?
No, it doesn't, because this is the first thing that I change as well. Like,
exactly.
Once it happens to you twice, that's it. You will never let it happen again, because that is the biggest pain.
Exactly. Yeah. Um, so yeah, I just wanted to show you guys that so you don't get bit in your lab. It's something we have a little automation or a little walkthrough for you in the ICE Online Help as well. It'll help you turn that off if you forget exactly how I did just that.
Well, staying
So
with the password discussion, one thing that
yeah,
I wanted to bring up because it's a current annoyance for me is that although we can change the password through Ansible while we're provisioning and bringing everything up, and the password does change and you can log into it when you go to the GUI for the first time, but since you've used a zero touch provisioning source to provision your host, whether it's through cloud or even if you use ZTP and VMware or Nutanix or anything like that, with 3.2 and newer, ICE is still going to force that new change password when you log into it. So even if you change it through Ansible, you're still going to have to change your password if you go through the GUI to log in. Have you found a way around that yet, or is it just better to not change your password through Ansible?
as a matter of fact, I have. I'm going to show you right now. So I did this precisely because, like Charlie said, the password we've been using to configure it with the APIs is no longer valid as the admin user. And so what we want to do now is we want to go and reset the password that we just changed back to the one we were using originally. Because again, this is our eval, this is our lab, we're playing with this. And so what we want to do is we want to go ahead and run the password playbook. We have to add the ask pass so it prompts for the SSH password because again, we're using our SSH keys to log into this via the CLI. And you can see that I just reset the password via CLI. And then
But that
I
only
can,
matters after you've logged into ICE to the GUI, right?
right. So you can do it. Yeah, you have to do it after you log into the GUI because that's what's going to prompt a change. Um, and I ran the facts again here as well. So again, you can run the facts lots of times and see everything. Um, but just wanted you all to see that you can run that nice playbook for you really quick. It takes about 30 seconds because again, in the CLI, when you do it, it takes a while to actually make the change, but it does. Now we could go log back into ICE and we're back to our original password that we provisioned. We don't have to use the new one that we used temporarily. And that means that all of our automations are going to work. We don't have to do anything special. So now that we've done that, we want to basically what I call deploying ICE. So if this was an ICE deployment with multiple nodes and we had all these different services running, we want to go ahead and do an ICE deployment. And that's what Charlie's going to, that's what he always does in his multi-node deployments. Uh, I'm going to go through and I only got the one node. It's only for eval. So guess what? There's nothing special to be done. It goes really fast. But you can customize this if you want to play around. I only want my node to be in a standalone state because I'm just, again, playing in my lab, nothing special. But if you wanted to do something special in your lab, you wanted to turn different services off and on through automation because that's how you're, some of the things that you're using, like maybe device admin in your network, you can go ahead and turn those on through the deploy automation. So there's that. Um, Anything else you want to say about the doing the deploy, Charlie? Since you got all the crazy nodes going on in your stuff.
Um, One thing I would say is pay attention to the certificates, and ICE has a very special format that's needed if you're going to provision a certificate through API or Ansible or anything like that. Honestly, it's documented very well on our DevNet. If you go into Open API for certificates, it tells you the command that's needed. You're going to need some sort of a dot or star nix terminal to run the command, but it's going to basically take all of the spaces and any breaks in there out and put in a slash n, and then you can use that as a plain text to send your certificate file to ICE. So also for that, you don't want to store that in your playbooks either, since it is a sensitive information. So do an environment variable or stash that somewhere else so it's not in plain text in your playbooks.
I hope you're going to be doing a webinar because I really didn't understand half of what you just said.
I didn't understand half of it either. when before I started doing it, but now that I've done it a few times, yeah, it's going to be part of that upgrade webinar that I do.
Oh, good. Thank goodness. Okay, because that was really hard to understand.
I hear you.
Um, but speaking of certificates, I did want to do a certificates automation real quick, just as a placeholder. I'm waiting for Charlie to do his, so then I can add his to mine. So again, I just added this not implemented sort of a placeholder. So once Charlie gets his written, then I can copy and paste his code from his repository, and I'll put it into mine, and I'll do my certificates for my deployment. So I'm definitely waiting on that one, Charlie. So what we're going to do
Happy to
next?
share it with you.
Thank you. What we're going to do next is configure ICE. So in my playbook here, we've seen the ICE YAML file, but I want to show you these different roles. Ansible can put together playbooks into these like little mini packages for stateful configuration. So I have some for AWS there. Here's the ones for ICE CLI commands, like the password reset you just saw. Um, the facts you've seen me run. We're going to do endpoint groups and some other things. We're going to configure things. So these are the default variables. I don't have any default endpoint groups defined here, but you can see this is my task to configure it. This is how you configure it in Ansible. And then this is some that I have included if you wanted to use these. I'm just going to comment out the empty endpoint groups, and I'm going to uncomment these real endpoint groups, and we're going to use these. I'm going to save that file, and we're going to use that in our configuration. We're also going to be doing it with ICE endpoints. So if I go into that vars file, I have some, I got to uncomment that or comment the other one and uncomment this one. I got to do that a couple times with these different resources. So we're going to go provision all these things, comment, uncomment, you get the idea. Internal users, same thing. So again, these are the ones that I've included in the repository. You don't have to use them. You can totally paste over it and do your own things. These are some network device groups I just added just to give you some ideas if you're wondering how to use it or what are some things you can use. These are some different ones. There's lots of different ways to slice and dice your network device groups. So these are some ones you might want to play with and check out. I've got some in there for like hospitals, medical stuff, and for universities and things like that. I've got my own file of network devices. I didn't share them with you in my repository, but I'm going to put them in here right now. You can see I've got a placeholder with that radius secret. I'm going to close all these files out now, and we're going to run this thing. And so that ICE YAML, let's run it. And here's the configuration file for configuring. Basically what it does is it runs through any of those roles or tasks that we may have used. Some are commented out and some I've uncommented because we're going to run those. These are ones I'm working on. So stay tuned in my repository and you'll see some of these other things, including policies. That's another webinar in the future as well. How are we going to configure ICE policies through automation? So when that's all done, we'll get a nice configured banner, hopefully. So let's do this. All right, so if we go back to our command line, and now we're going to configure ICE. Runs through it, skips all the other ones, but it does the configure, and now it's basically going to go through and it's going to start configuring all those things in our ICE or ICE node. So not very sexy to sit here and watch. You get the idea. So let's go back to our GUI and let's log in with our original password that we provisioned with because we reset it. We can do that. And we'll get in there and I'll show you these things being provisioned. I don't know why. It's like when the APIs are running, it kind of slows down the GUI at the same time. I don't know if that's something with the API gateway or what, but I noticed that it didn't want to let me log in until my APIs were done running. Then I can go in, take a look at my network device groups that I just configured, right? You saw some of those. There they are. Those are all the ones I uncommented. I can now use those with my network devices. So I think you get the idea, right? So you can see it was all configured, ready to go. Didn't take very long. I didn't do a whole lot. You can see that Ansible can be kind of slow. Takes basically, you can get 1 to 2 things done per second. So it's not the fastest, But if you just, fire it up, the night before or early in the morning, go get coffee, breakfast, whatever, before you commute into work, whatever, hopefully it'll be there for you when waiting for you.
A lot of times it's faster than navigating around the GUI, though.
And it's repeatable consistently, right?
Absolutely.
That's the beauty of it. So you can just do it over and over and over again. So the next thing we want to do is, now that we've configured everything, we probably want to do a backup just in case we lose things, right? So for that, we should do a backup. And so guess how that's done? You use the backup tag. So here we go. Skips over all the things that aren't backup, and it checks to make sure we have a repository configured, just in case. And then by default, it's going to use a backup now. To use the now keyword, I actually told it to prefix my backup file with ISE and the date and time. So that's what it's going to use in the backup file. And so once the backup process kicks off, it'll give you a little notification, tell you this is going to, in my experience, I do small ones. It only takes me 10 minutes to do a backup. It might take you longer if you got a much bigger config. But otherwise, this tells you the start date, everything's there. I try to give you all the details that you may want to go monitor the task with. So it's going to sit there. We're going to monitor that task and wait for it to be done. Meanwhile, let's go see what it looks like in the GUI. So if you go, there it is, right? So we kicked it off by API, but now it's sitting there in the GUI. We can just sit back and wait. But again, it takes 10 minutes. We're not going to wait for 10 minutes. We're going to speed this along a little bit here. And so you should start to, so you can see the stuff kind of incrementing in the background on the CLI, but then there it is in the GUI as well. Okay, it's all done. And now we should be able to scroll down and take a look. Oh, there it is. It finally finished over there in the CLI. So you can see successful backup to our repository via OpenAPI, right? Really cool. So there's the process. I said take about 10 minutes. Took us 9 minutes, 18 seconds. Cool. All right. So that's a backup. Pretty easy, huh? Have you done backups that way, Charlie? Did we lose Charlie? All right. Well, I'm going to keep going. Charlie might be off. Get another coffee or something. So what we're going to do now is, now that we've done a backup, maybe we want to do a patch, because we deployed ISE 3.2 patch 2. That's the suggested release. But we just released ISE 3.2 patch 3. So probably would be a good idea to go ahead and get the latest patch on here, right? So to do that, what we do is we basically just go in to that vars file, the ISE.YAML vars file, and we can just change things around a little bit. So originally we deployed with ISE 3.2 patch 2, and now let's not deploy that one, and let's deploy patch 3. All we got to do is comment and uncomment these different patches, save that file, and those variables that ISE patch file name being defined, that's all our Ansible role needs to be able to go and actually patch ISE. So just like we did when we provisioned, we're now just going to patch ISE with patch 3. Instead of patch 2, now it's patch 3. So that's the previous one. We're gathering those ISE facts to make sure that the versions match. You can actually see the patch qualification, actually do some comparisons there to make sure that this patch is going to be valid for this ISE release. And so I'm going to go and run through this, speeding this up. All right, there we are. We should be patched now. So it took 27 minutes to do that patch, but we are patched. You can see our ISE node is now patched to patch 3, so that all worked well. We didn't have any hot patches, so, or it's not implemented. So I'm working. I'll get there. I'll work on the hot patch. But if we did, all we need to do is uncomment the the hot patch list or add our hot patches that are in our repository, and that should work for us. So 27 minutes is what that took. And so ready to go on to the next one. So what we want to do next is sorry, we're going to rerun this thing. All right, we want to run our facts again. We can do that just to make sure that we're on patch number 3. There it is. So real quick, patch number 3. That's just I wrote this little role because I like to be able to see things, especially when you have a large deployment or multiple nodes. It's really helpful to see that all of them are consistently on the same version and patch number and all that kind of stuff. So now it's going to get a little crazier. What about upgrade? You've been seeing all these really cool API things. What about upgrade? Because we've done webinars, Pavan's done webinars on upgrade with the GUI and stuff. These are the different methods that we advertise, and there is one more, and that's the APIs. So what if we could do an upgrade via API? And that's exactly what we're going to try and do here right now. So the way I want to do it is we're going to go to ISE 3.3. It was just released. We're on 3.2 patch 3 right now. So let's upgrade via backup and restore and provisioning a new ISE node. So we don't want the patches, not going to install that. But what we are going to do is we have to change our AWS AMI, our new image. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and we're going to copy that image. I have it down below. I always try to keep the different images handy in my automations. I'm just going to paste that one in. So now instead of doing ISE 3.2, we're going to do ISE 3.3 in AWS. All right. So 3.3. Save this. And now no more patches, right? If I wanted to do, again, an upgrade and also install a patch, I could totally do that by uncommenting. It would run through and do all that. So we're going to run through called the ISE extension. This is going to go through, do a backup of our current config, save it with the ISE prefix. So we have basically a snapshot of what we've been playing with. We're going to terminate this AWS instance. So basically this is going to give us a new 90 days on our evaluation to make it eternal. Then we're going to provision a new ISE node, right? We're going to make sure it's running. We can use that information to do a new DNS entry, wait for it to run. We're going to patch that node. If we're not going to add patches because ISE 3.3 doesn't have any patches yet, but if it did, then we're going to get that latest backup from the repository. We're going to restore it to that ISE node using that backup encryption key, which we could also do in the main config. But we can restore it here. This basically is a way of saying that we want to use the last file out of the repository that matches that prefix. Then, and if we wanted to restore a very specific file, that option is there as well. So it just depends on what you want to do with it. You can just configure it. Otherwise, we're going to extend this evaluation by upgrading to ISE 3.3. So because we're provisioning a node, we got to have an SSH password in order to go in and do the CLI provisioning. They also want to make sure that AWS node, that instance, has an SSH key. So we're going to go through and do all that stuff that we did previously, right? We're just going to run through it all really fast, see what happens. All right, so we've got the new ISE node provision. We have a new public IP address on that new ISE node. Got the, oh, actually we just terminated it. So now we've got to go through, we're going to make sure our VPC exists. Okay, here comes the new ISE node. There we go. So Charllie, you've done this a lot, right? With all the different cloud providers. Is it all pretty much the same across the different cloud providers?
They are. I've just noticed that during the patching, I have to run it against the API through Ansible than the built-in scripts because AWS times out when I'm installing a patch. So if I do the API, then I can get around that timeout by extending that timeout timer.
Yeah.
Other than that, everything else is pretty much the same. While we're waiting for this to finish, though, I know that a lot of people may not have access to or want to incur the cost of cloud. So this can definitely be done on-prem as well. And I actually have, since I've been working on that upgrade webinar through Ansible, I've got some playbooks for VMware that I could happily send you so you can put that into your GitHub repository as well, so that those people with VMware can use that.
Yeah, please. I would definitely want that. Um, so we have a problem. Something happened on this node. I don't know what the problem is. I've run it before and it's worked fine, but to doing it today, um, it just failed. It will not respond to me. Uh, so I actually took a look inside of AWS, and it. I actually went through and even re-provisioned it back out again and did a full restore. And I did it on a larger node. I'm like, well, is it because I did 3.3 and I did it on an eval instance and it's too small, it's underpowered? Um, all it would tell me in AWS is that I had some kind of reachability problem. That's what we just saw. Is it timed out? I couldn't reach it. Um, so I don't know what the problem was, but I wanted to basically destroy it and start over. And so the last thing I think I want to show you guys how to do is how to destroy something. Um, so I've got a little thing to destroy, at least for ICE, for AWS and cloud resources. You always want to destroy stuff because you don't want to incur those charges, right? If you're done playing with it, or maybe you got to go from one project to another project, you got to destroy it. So I got this. It basically goes through, sees what all the resources you have, confirms you want to do it. I do everything by project because we work on lots of different things, and so I try to have different projects running so I can tag it and I can bring it up or destroy it or do whatever I need to do by project. And that's what I have here. So we're going to delete all those resources, and it's now our IC has been destroyed. So at least in AWS. So that's how you can do that. And it only took a couple minutes to do something like that. So what I did, I know you guys like, but Thomas, you said this was going to be internal evaluation. This was going to work. This backup and restore is going to work. What I did is I actually went inside of AWS. I connected, and it's there. My ICE node actually, it did come up. Everything is running fine. I can ping Cisco.com. I can do all this stuff. So I don't know why it is not coming up. So I'm open to anything. I check the firewall. It's the security groups. It's totally wide open. Um, I don't know what the problem is. So that's how I'm going to spend my day today is troubleshooting this thing to see what I did wrong. But it was working before, and now it's not working. So it's a weird one. But otherwise, it should just work. But that's the idea for how to do an ICE eternal evaluation and all the things in that life cycle. Charllie, are there any other things you'd want to mention before we wrap this?
Um, One thing I will say is that while using the ZTP process, you can install patches and hot patch to the ZTP prior to the initial reboot, which saves a reboot time on like VMware or KVM or anything like that. Remember that the provisioning through cloud is about 20 minutes before it starts actually starting your services. On-prem, you're still gonna do, it takes like 25 minutes to upload the OVI, then you have to go through the installation process. So you're still gonna be about 50 minutes before you get to where you are at the 30-minute mark with cloud. So even with the ZTP process, cloud installation is still by and far a lot faster.
Yeah, definitely. And hopefully you guys have got some good ideas about how to do automations. Maybe you just take one of these things from what you learned today and you go apply those, and maybe that helps you save some time in your job with ICE as well. So, Rigo, I know we're just a few minutes over, probably don't have time for questions, but if there was one, we'd love to try and answer it.
Great presentation, Thomas and Charlie. Thank you. I do see just one outstanding question here from one of our audience members. The question is, have you looked into using Ansible AWX with these playbooks to further automate and schedule rebuilds?
Well, I mean, yeah, that's what I just tried to show. And Charlie, why don't you remind everybody what you're working on?
Well, I think what they're talking about is there's a GUI that you can do so that you can store your Ansible playbooks in a web GUI, so that you can just use it however you want and run it on a schedule and different things like that. That's a totally different
okay.
instance.
Okay.
I think I sent you a video on this when I was looking at it. So yeah, we're actually looking at it, but we wanted these series to be a little bit more accessible than to say, I mean, first you have to learn Ansible and to run Ansible before you can start doing something like AWS or anything else with that. And we want to get people to get into that learning phase right now.